right, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and start our XCOM meeting. Glad to see everybody. I know we've got Cherie, I know is here virtually, but I think we've got most everybody else is here. We appreciate the staff making sure we had a little winter weather for those of us down south. I personally left 82 degrees yesterday to get up here to, I guess it was 34 or 33 or something like that when I got here. So I always appreciate a little winter weather for those of us down south. So we'll go ahead and get started. First item of business is approval of the agenda. Do have one modification under business, and that's going to be a discussion about Northeast biological sampling, and Bob will be leading that. But is there any other recommended modifications to the agenda? Seeing none, any opposition to accepting the agenda? Yes, we have. Seeing none, we'll consider it accepted. Also, you have the meeting summary from our November 9th, 2022 meeting. Any modifications, corrections, edits to that? Seeing none, any opposition to accepting it as presented? Seeing none, we'll consider that accepted by unanimous consent. This time we offer public comment. Is there anybody? I don't see anybody here physically. Is there anybody online that wishes to make a comment to the executive committee? Anybody? Don't hear anything, so we'll proceed along. So next item is number 4, which is a CARES Act update, and this is going to be the tag team by Bob and Laura. So let me start with.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. There is a spreadsheet up on the screen. It's probably a little tricky to read from the back, but I'll kind of go through the highlights of it, and we can get into it. But actually, and what's up on the screen is what we call CARES 2 or the CAA. The update on CARES 1, and Laura, correct me if these numbers aren't correct, but we've got about $50,000 unspent in CARES 1 and about $100,000 of uncashed checks that we have issued, and folks are sitting on them or for various reasons we're unable to get in touch with them to see if they intend to cash those checks or not. So out of the $118 million we got for CARES 1, we're down to about $150,000. So that's pretty good. It's kind of noise in the system at that point. So we'll try to find good use for that last little bit of money. And you know, at the previous meeting, at the annual meeting, there was a discussion about using the $50,000 for some commission expenses that we didn't take overhead for to cover postage and 1099s and all sorts of things. So I think that's where the $50,000 will go. We'll see what happens with the $100,000 of uncashed checks. And is that about the right numbers, Laura? The ballpark? Okay. And then jumping into CARES 2, the discussion today for CARES 2 is essentially there's some money left over. What do you guys want to do with it? If you look at the numbers that are up on the screen are, yeah, if you go to, Tony, can you go back to the top panel? And I need the far right-hand column that says balance.
You're pretty close, yeah. So column H.
Okay, column H that's up on the screen there is essentially the unspent balance from 5 of the states, actually 6 if you count North Carolina's $1 that they have. Massachusetts has about $16,000 unspent. New Jersey has 4.6 or so million unspent. South Carolina 1.175. Delaware 2.829. And when you add those totals together, you get about $8.6 million that the states indicated they're not going to be able to spend. So the question is, what do you all want to do with that $8.6 million? In CARES 1, when we had leftover money, we reallocated that to the states that indicated that they had a remaining need. Yeah, okay. The states that indicated they had a remaining need based on the proportion of the original allocation from the federal government. So we could do that again, and if you want to go that route, or to go a little bit further, the states that have indicated so far that they have a remaining need for CARES 2 are Massachusetts, Florida, New York, North Carolina, Virginia, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Connecticut. So if we reallocate the $8.6 million to those states, based on the original formula, what we have there is the numbers that are in the light blue column up on the screen right now. So 3 million to Massachusetts, 2.6 to Florida, 730,000 to New York. North Carolina gets about 600,000. Virginia, close to 500,000. Rhode Island, New Hampshire each get 386, and as well as Connecticut. So Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Connecticut all would get 386,000 under that allocation approach. And that's just one option. The other, if you look at the far right-hand column up on the screen, this indicates what states have told us their remaining need might be. Massachusetts, 50,000, North Carolina, 17 million, Virginia, 4 million or 3.6 million, and Connecticut, 13 million. So we could reallocate based on what those states have indicated their need is another strategy that we could use. But, you know, I think, and we don't really have a number from Florida, New York, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire on what their remaining need is. So we'd have to fill that in to fill out those ratios. So that's kind of the background of where we are. 8.6 million, we could allocate it as we did in the first go around, or we could come up with something different depending on what the states have indicated their remaining needs are. So with that, Laura can fill in more details.
I wanted to point out that the balance column is, if you look to the left one column where it says projected to spend. So the balance is based on the projected spending. In other words, Joe in New Jersey thinks that he's going to spend 1.269 million, but that's subject to change, right, Joe?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then I did hear from Jason last night, and the minimum is 600,000 for Rhode Island that you would like. Please fill in the rest. Thank you.
Yeah, we sort of worked that out, and sorry for sending it so late, but I mean, to sort of do it in a way that would be optimal would be about $1 million, sort of to make it worthwhile, to make the checks meaningful. 600,000 would work.
So I guess the other point is currently CARES 2 has to be spent out by the end of July this year. Obviously, we're going to have to extend that. We're not going to be able to sort this all out, get money, get reallocated, and the states decide what they want to do with it and move forward. So I think where we would extend it probably 1 year through the end of July of 2024. So that's kind of the time frame that we're talking about for the reallocated funds.
All right, go ahead, Erica, and then I'll go to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for Florida, our need, it's hard for us to say what our need would be, but we could spend any and all remaining funds you'd be willing to provide to us.
Sounds like my daughter when she asked for money. So, all right, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to comment, and I don't see Chris here from North Carolina, but when you go by the formula, you know, the difference between $600,000 and 17 million is a lot. So if they need 17 million, you know, I just wonder if we go by the formula, if states are just going to get such a small amount, they can't really work with it.
All right, John, and I'll go to you, Pat.
So I couldn't tell you at this moment what New York's need is, but I'm sure it's kind of in the vein of spending every dollar you have. We have several, a large number of heavy hitters that get, fractions of what their loss was. So we could take it all.
All right, Mr. Gear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm in the same situation as Lynn in Virginia, that we have a definite need of, we were able to give about 51% of the requested funds. So we got about almost $7.5 million in requests. So receiving, I can't say from here, about $401,000 isn't very much. So, whatever we get, we'd be happy with, but 400 is a big difference from 3.4 million.
All right, Kathy, I think I'll give you an opportunity to maybe speak to what Lynn had said about sort of where's your threshold of practicality, I guess, when it comes to North Carolina.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. And this figure for North Carolina would get North Carolina fishermen and dealers processed and covered 100%. So that is what we provided. We also have some figures that would get them to different percentages of recovered along the way. So much like all the other states, we could take whatever we can get and absolutely be able to spend it, minus that $1.
All right, go back to you, John.
Yeah, so the threshold the target we were going with was about a 40% compensation of their loss. So that's, and we can usually cover most fishermen up until the point where we start getting into 6-digit numbers, and then it goes up from there, and then their return drops significantly.
Okay, all right, Jake.
Just real quick math, another option here. I just happened to notice there's 8 highlighted states and $8 million. So you could equally distribute it, give everybody $1 million.
We always look to Jay for the elegant solution here.
Even I can do that.
And I think, let me go to Cherie and then we can sort of follow up on that. Go ahead, Cherie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, New Hampshire will be fine with what is indicated there at the 386,745. We'd be fine with just that.
I guess the question is, if we went with the McNamee imperative, does that give a state too much money? I mean, is that more than any of these 8 states could actually distribute?
Yeah, I wouldn't need that amount of money. I would not need $1 million. I would be very happy with the 386, and you could distribute evenly beyond that. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, Dan.
Yeah, just for the record, our nominal request for 50,000 was for a seafood marketing project, and we did not want to revamp the whole subsidy or individual checks program because we didn't think there'd be enough money and it's too labor intensive. So ours is just a discrete request for some seafood marketing.
All right, so let me just throw this one out there. So if we take the total amount of available funds back out, what Massachusetts wants, what New Hampshire needs, and then split it up evenly, I mean, amongst the other 6, does that put somebody in a situation of having more than they can legitimately use? I mean, just an alternative. I mean, not pushing that one. I'm not doing a sales pitch on it. I'm just trying to figure out how we can find a place that addresses the needs and does it in the simplest way. Because it's fairly likely that we're going to have underspending of some of these projected spends anyway. So, we're not dealing with the absolute final numbers here anyway. So we're going to have some left.
As well as return checks.
And we got the return check effect as well too. So Bob.
Yeah, just quick math, which is usually dangerous. If New Hampshire gets 386, Mass gets the 50K, and you take the remainder divided by the 6 remaining states, you get 1.37 million for each of those remaining states.
All right, so how about some feedback on that as a strategy? Does that seem reasonable, or you want to go back to the allocate by formula, or is there some other scenario that seems to be better? So is the lack of hands mean general agreement with the modified McNamee imperative? All right, John.
At the risk of sounding like a squeaky wheel, and I don't know how people around the room, to what extent they were able to compensate their fishermen for their losses, but New York used 40% in order to try to reach as many of our fishermen as possible. And it sounds like in some states, fishermen are being compensated for 100% of their loss. So there's a large disparity there. Thanks.
Well, probably, I think we're in one of these classical situations of, you got to be careful to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but, so, Justin?
All right, the risk of belaboring this, one potential approach is you could take that amount minus the Massachusetts and the New Hampshire allocation, split it in half, take half and allocate it equally amongst the remaining states, and then take the other half and allocate it proportionally according to the remaining need. So you kind of incorporate both approaches that way. That would be some pretty tough, quick math. Probably won't expect you to do that on the fly, but
Nothing like a little mental gymnastics early in the morning just to see who's paying attention. So, all right, we'll see. Did you get that?
I did. Split in half and allocate remaining formula by formula.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do the math, but I got the idea.
I didn't do that.
Okay.
either. I'm not going to do that.
So that's another scenario here. Now, would that address the needs? I think this is one of the challenges here is we're trying to balance availability and need and do it in some sort of consistent manner, which is hard to do because, some states spent out everything they had. So they've already done what they can do and met needs fairly well. And some states still have large unmet needs in certain sectors. So again, we're probably not going to achieve perfection. So it's what gets us the closest to addressing everybody's needs the best. So I guess absent knowing exactly what the numbers are in this scenario, can we do that?
I'll do it, but I'm not.
All right, Laura's is gonna try to do that just so we can know exactly what we're dealing with here in terms of numbers. All right, Erica and then Mel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the suggestion by Justin. It's hard for many of us because we are facing needs that are unmet and no one wants to be seen as seeding up funds for their stakeholders to share with others. But whatever we can reach that's agreeable among everyone, we'd support because this money is important to all our stakeholders.
Thank you, Erica. All right, Mel.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there. It's need versus just some sort of equitable distribution. And the needs are so great, as John explained, and Erica and Kat. You don't have enough to deal with the needs. So I think what you're left with is some formula, which looks kind of like a derivation of the bow tie law or something. It's some sort of formula for some equitable distribution, but there's not enough there to deal adequately with the total needs, and the total needs are certainly there and understood and appreciated. But I think a formulaic approach like you're following is your best bet.
Let's let Laura do a little math here and we'll go to our next agenda item and then we'll circle back around to this when we have some numbers that we can actually react to. So, all right, good discussion. Next is stipends for legislator and governor's appointee commissioners. And I'm going to turn that over to Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the supplemental material that was sent out middle of last week, there's a brief paper that I pulled together on just kind of a discussion paper on stipends and some thoughts and ideas, not really pushing for anything here, just some information to get the conversation started. As folks will remember, at the annual meeting, at the executive committee, and a little bit at the policy board, there's a discussion about compensating legislative and governor's appointees for meetings, and there was discussion on exactly what meetings they should be compensated for. Is it all meetings outside of our normal quarterly meetings? Is it meetings above and beyond even the joint meetings with the Mid-Atlantic Council? It's these kind of one-off unique meetings. What is it? Or is it all the meetings that the legislative and governor's appointees participate in? The paper, pulls together just a little bit of background and notes, the commission hasn't obviously compensated legislative and governor's appointees in the past, and this is in contrast to what happens at the councils. Councils currently, by definition that's in the Magnuson-Stevens Act, they compensate their members at a GS 15 Step 7 rate, which is about $540 per day right now, and this is taxable income. So that's just sort of a benchmark for background here. It doesn't directly impact the commission, and obviously we're not bound by the provisions of Magnuson-Stevens. So I pulled together a couple options just to sort of describe what the financial impact might be to the commission if we went down one of those roads. Option one, status quo, obviously no stipends, no financial impact. Option two is just compensating or providing a stipend for LGA commissioners for meetings above and beyond our quarterly meetings and meetings above and beyond the joint meetings with one of the councils. Every once in a while, we'll meet jointly with the New England Council or the South Atlantic Council on herring or maybe Spanish mackerel, but generally most of the joint meetings are with the Mid-Atlantic on summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and bluefish. If we did just those extraordinary meetings beyond our 4 meetings and the joint meetings, so that would be meetings such as the Herring Committee of New England, the Recreational Fish Summit that happened in 2022. We've got the Scenario Planning Summit that's happening in a couple of weeks. If we were to compensate LGA commissioners for that, a ballpark of that's about a $7,000 impact. So not a whole lot of impact to the commission. Anytime we do this, we'd have to sort of define, or somebody has to make a decision on what's a qualified meeting, what's not, and we can come up with criteria to do that. Option 3 is essentially the LGAs get a stipend for any day that they participate in commission activities above and beyond these sort of regularly scheduled quarterly meetings. And that's about a $44,000 impact based on, I kind of did some rounding off, as the assumption is about 75% of the LGAs would attend joint meetings with the mid and those sorts of things. But that's a ballpark estimate, $45,000 or so. I did the math. If commissioners were to attend, or LGA commissioners were to be compensated for all meetings, including these quarterly meetings, that would be about a $200,000, $220,000 a budget requirement for that. So that's just a ballpark for what we're talking about. And then other considerations, obviously there's unique things to ASMSC that the councils don't have to wrestle with. And how do we handle proxies if there are occurrences where LGA commissioners at the table, but their proxies in the back of the room, they swap out for different board meetings. How would that be handled? Virtual participation, if LGA commissioners online versus in the room, does that affect anything? At the annual meeting, there's a conversation about sort of eligibility to receive a stipend. Who gets that? Who would be eligible to receive that? There's some conversation about, well, somebody's being fully compensated and they're here as sort of part of their job where they're fully employed by someone else, receiving their salary as if they, to sit in the room. Maybe they're not eligible because they're already receiving a salary. I think an example of a past commissioner might be Bill Adler, who was the president of the Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association, on a full salary being down here. Should he also, and I'm not picking on Bill by any means, but that's the type of example we talked about is, should that individual receive a salary plus a stipend? And that's up to this group. How are travel days handled? The councils, I should have said this earlier, each of the 3 East Coast councils handle compensation differently. They handle travel days, they handle partial days and hourly and all these different things. They all do it differently, which doesn't help us that much, but that's the way it goes. So how do we handle travel days? How do we handle partial meetings? If somebody's on a webinar for 3 hours, what's the stipend rate there? There is a bit of administrative burden for the commission because this is taxable money, so we'd have to send 1099 forms out to any of the LGA commissioners or proxies that receive a stipend. So again, that's just a quick background, not pushing for any outcome here from the staff level, but just wanted to put something on paper to get the conversation started.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. And I want to echo what Bob said, not really looking for a definitive outcome now. More of us to have this information presented and have him review it and then have an opportunity for some discussion. There'll be some discussion on this at the LGA luncheon today, so we kind of got things a little bit out of sync here. But I think my goal would be for us to make a definitive decision at our spring meeting as regards to this. So, but at this point, I just want to open it up for folks to sort of give some feedback or impressions on this. So we'll start with Eric and then we'll go to Dennis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not on this committee, but thanks for recognizing me anyway. So, you know, I've been suggesting another option for a long time, which is would cost no money, essentially no money. And that is, I mean, I'm a proxy for the legislature, so I probably won't qualify anyway. Probably shouldn't be compensated to start with. But what about, you know, I would be interested in not taking money away from ASMFC. I mean, I signed on for this job like everybody else in this room, and whether I was compensated in dollars, that's one thing. But what I would be very interested in is considering being able to deduct my time at the GS 17, $540 a day from my taxes. Yeah, so, I mean, that's it's in kind, I guess, in kind money from me to you, but that would cost the commission really nothing, but it would be, you know, at the end of the year, it would be a very favorable to somebody like me if that was a option 8 or 9, whatever that is. And I've been talking about that for a while, so I'd like you to at least consider that if you could. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Eric. Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I'm not sure how all that would work, but I'm sure it's something we can certainly investigate and report back at our spring meeting on that. So, all right, go to Dennis and then Dan and then Roy.
Yes, thank you, Spud. I was the one that initiated this, and after giving it a lot of thought, and my thought was simply, it wasn't to compensate everyone for everything as in some of the options that Bob talked about. You know, when I proposed the idea, I simply looked at what these added things were and using the herring participation as an example. And I think it's above and beyond our normal activities. That's where I was when I started it. And since then, giving it more thought, I don't have a oar in the water because I don't see myself as being compensated in any way under any program that we could possibly adopt. But I also look at you, Spud. You're a chair, and I'm sure that you're spending a lot of time and you're a retiree. And if the commission needs to send you across the country or to Washington, I don't understand why, just as an example, your time isn't compensated. You know, Eric talked about being a proxy to a legislator and probably not being entitled, but he's more entitled than, you know, most everybody, because the legislators, if they were sitting here today, they're receiving a salary. I don't think that in any circumstance that we would envision someone being able to double dip, call it double dipping. If you want to accept a stipend, if we had one, then I think you'd have to sign a form that you would forego your salary in that day. That gets complicated, but again, I don't think that we want anything that involves double dipping, and I don't think that a person who's sitting here should be compensated for the normal activities. Like you said, we volunteered to be here. but I don't think we volunteered for how it's grown over the years. You know, just a lot more to it. So, you know, I envision this, my idea would maybe cost the commission $1,000, $2,000 a year of small potatoes. And we just finished a discussion where we were sorting out millions and millions of dollars. And yet we see difficulties in paying people what they're worth for their time. So whatever this is decided, however it's decided, is okay with me. I'm always fighting against something, it seems like. But, you know, every one of you executive committee members, save Roy and I, are making a good amount of money today. And you're making a decision about, going to make a decision about the rest of us, what we could possibly receive. So it's it's just different. But I don't think that there's anything precluding us from working out some sort of a small system to take care of people like, use Ray Kane's name, who's going to be going to maybe a couple of, he doesn't like me using his name, but, you know, going to the Herring Board, or, you know, my further thought about yourself having to spend extra time away from your retirement doing this. That's all. Whatever you do, you do. Whatever you don't do, you don't do.
All right. Thank you, Dennis. And I think it would be good to have this discussion again at the LGA luncheon, just to have some feedback from those folks. And I think that will help us as an ex-com make a decision. So I'm gonna go to Dan and then Roy.
Yeah, if I could continue the conversation that Dennis started, I just want to point out that our Massachusetts legislator seat is occupied by a legislator. And when she's not here, her proxy is her staffer. So they're both paid for by the Commonwealth already. I have another option you might want to consider, and that is to communicate to the various governors and make some of these folks special state employees. They're appointed by the governor. So why not have a governor's appointee, for example, be a special state employee at whatever rate that governor wants to pay, and then the legislator would just be paid for their normal legislative salary. Now, I know things are different in New Hampshire. They don't meet so often. I can't solve that, but that's another suggestion that I would have, is to let the states compensate those individuals at a rate to represent that state or that Commonwealth.
All right, thanks, Dan. Roy, and then I'll go to you, John Clark, and then Pat Keller.
Thanks, Bud. I have some personal opinions on this consideration, but obviously we have not discussed it at length yet with the LGAs. So I guess I can deal from a personal standpoint. Like many LGAs, I accepted the call to participate on the commission a number of years ago when there were basically just the 4 commission meetings. And since then, it has proliferated to these joint meetings. And that's why we're debating these options. It's the joint meetings, the extra time away from home that can become a burden. Now, hybrid meetings have helped in that regard. Personally, what I've chosen to do of my own free will is attend as many commission meetings as I'm physically able to attend, and try to attend the joint meetings virtually. And that has lessened the burden of being away and travel days and that kind of thing. So that's how I've handled it personally. But it would be an individual decision as to whether a person receives a stipend. We'd have to examine whether the person involved is representing the legislator. Is he on the state's payroll? If so, I would suggest that they don't get additional compensation. Are they being paid by a sportsman's association? Are they being paid by a commercial fishing association? There's all these factors for each individual. And there's a few like commercial fishermen who are actually sacrificing income in order to be here. And I think they deserve some consideration too. I don't want to bankrupt the commission. I think 44,000 is a pretty big chunk of change, but I think I saw a number that Bob generated in the 200,000 range if they were if LGAs were compensated for every meeting, whether it's a commission meeting or a council meeting or whatever. I think that's way beyond what we were intending. We all agreed that we would donate our time for these quarterly meetings. It's just the extra ones that have deserved the additional consideration. So I'll be very interested to see what other LGAs come up with in lunchtime today. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
And thank you, Roy, and you and Dennis both for bringing this up, because you're right. I mean, the workload has certainly changed over time from what it used to be, and I don't think that trend is going to go the opposite direction anytime soon. So it's certainly something that we need to be aware of, because we ask a lot out of folks, and we want to make sure those folks feel like they're being treated fairly. All right, John Clark, and then I'll go to Pat Kelleher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a couple of questions. Bob, I take it these stipends are on top of whatever the commission's already paying to cover expenses for all the LGAs, and just wondering how much that was. And then I seem to recall before we came back to the in-person meetings, we had discussed possibly making 1 or 2 meetings a year, virtual meetings. So, I mean, that would be a way to save money, of course, but I'm just kind of curious because it doesn't seem like we've ever discussed that again. And before we came back to the full-time hybrid meetings like we have now, I thought we're going to look into that as a possibility too, which might make things a little easier for LGAs. Thanks.
Yeah, I can respond to that. I think with the idea of having at least 1, maybe 2 meetings a year virtual is still alive and viable. I think, at least personally, I wanted us to get back to seeing each other and renewing those relationships and all that, and then get a year or 2 under our belt of having those interpersonal actions again, and then let's have a discussion about winter's a perfectly good example. I mean, this is a somewhat light agenda for us, and travel this time of year can be pretty challenging for folks up and down the Eastern Seaboard. So it's still there. It's just, I think Joe told me that he's going to run on a campaign of all virtual meetings when he runs for chair. So you just might want to keep that in mind. So anyway, just want to let you know that. All right, Pat Kelleher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have reservations as it pertains to stipends, just because of the equity issues here, because it seems like every time I think of different scenarios, somebody's not going to be treated the way somebody else is going to be treated. And because of that, I've been having a hard time finding a way to support it. However, I had not heard Eric's idea. I mean, that is something that could be very beneficial for the individuals. Roy just listed a lot of different scenarios, and those people potentially would be covered if they wanted to take advantage of that type of an approach. So I think I really like that concept. I think it treats everybody the same, whether it's a special meeting or a regular meeting. And if we can find a way to move in that direction, I certainly could see the benefit of supporting and would be willing to support something of that nature.
All right, thanks. Bob said that they'll make sure that they will investigate this fully with our CPA before our next meeting, so we'll be able to have some feedback at our next meeting on the possibility of that and the details of it. But I think, you hit on something that's very important. That is, you can talk about the money part of it, but then probably the more difficult part is the eligibility criteria. And how do you apply those eligibility criteria? And it's not an insurmountable obstacle. It's just, you've got to do it. And then somebody has to be the police over the eligibility. And, is that going to create some hurt feelings and things? Maybe, you know, we all know, I mean, we live in a world of unintended consequences, and, you know, it's good to think all these things through. So let's see, I saw some other hands. We all got John, and then go ahead, John.
Thank you. I do think we should give, I mean, and you're right, there's a lot of questions to be answered about eligibility, but I do think that someone who is more or less a private business owner and is sacrificing their ability to control their business or be on the water fishing is that's a really important consideration. Those people do deserve compensation for extra time. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, well, I think we've had a good discussion about Pat Gear.
Yeah, I guess I had a question for Bob. Have we, what do, we know what the councils do, but what do the other commissions do? Do they provide stipends?
Yeah, no, as far as I know, they do not provide stipends.
Yeah, and as Bob mentioned, there's not even uniformity across the councils. I mean, the only thing that's uniform is the rate. The application of that can vary from, and I know that at least from my South Atlantic Council experience, you know, when we went through the pandemic, then it got kind of tricky about, okay, well, you know, if we have a 2-hour virtual meeting, you know, is everybody going to bill the council for 2 hours, you know, or not? And it really, it comes down, like Roy said, it comes down to almost an individual decision. I know just personally, there's things I'll do for the council. I'm not going to bill them for them. I'm at home. I'm on my computer for a couple hours. It doesn't really matter. You know, if they want to send me to some faraway location to meet with a bunch of hostile people, then maybe, you know, I might treat that a little differently. Not that they would ever do that to me, but I might treat that differently. But yeah, Joe.
Well, be careful if they send you up to New Jersey. No, I know. So, you know, one of the things that has come up, and you know, this is something that Tom Foti brought up a while ago, is that the joint meetings with the MID for 4 of our most active species have really, you know, turned on, and we tend to be meeting at the MID, which adds to our, you know, kind of troubles here since this is a larger gathering of folks. So, you know, I think trying to schedule some of those meetings when we can as a commission meeting that's a joint meeting would actually help alleviate some of it too.
All right, Roy.
If you would indulge me, just one more idea. Someone brought up the idea of the state governor's office compensating. I think that one really gives me the willies. Just the thought of having to go through that is terrifying, because then there would be competition to see who got the job, and it would become a political football. So that one doesn't appeal to me at all. Thank you.
Yeah, that one could get real tricky. I was just thinking, Spud, since you used to be law enforcement, I'm gonna send you to Atlanta, by the way. Now, since you're a state employee, would you mind staying up there for 2 or 3 days and dealing with the civil unrest? Like, no. Obviously, that's being somewhat facetious, but yeah, that would be, you know, it's an idea, but I think it may be hard, you know, to actually see implemented. But anyway, this is what this discussion is for ideas. So, any further discussion on this? Again, not looking for a decision. This is mainly just to vet these ideas, and then there'll be more discussion about this at the luncheon today, and then we'll investigate this tax benefit possibility, come back in the spring and talk about this some more. So does that sound good to everybody? All right. Do we have our numbers yet? No. All right, so we'll move on to the next one. John Clark reached out to Bob and I about an issue with sand tigers, and we thought it would be good to bring this before the whole XCOM. So I want to turn it over to John, and you sort of set up this discussion for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for putting it on the agenda. The issue, it's a minor issue, but I figured the best place to find out how this is affecting other states also is that over the years we've had various requests for collecting permits for prohibited sharks, in particular sand tigers, because they're such a good aquarium species. You know, they look fierce, but they're actually pretty docile. Over the last few years, we've had a request from, instead of directly from an aquarium as we used to have in the past, this was coming, I think, more from a consulting company, and they are doing this as a business. And the numbers they've been requesting have been going up quite a bit. And in their annual report, where they'll tell us where the sharks are going, I was actually quite taken aback as to see that sharks are going to places like Abu Dhabi, Las Vegas, and, you know, to a casino in Vegas. And I'm sure in your states, also the collecting permits are for scientific and educational purposes. And we consider aquariums an educational purpose, and we have a specific regulation that allows us to give permits for prohibited sharks for the educational purposes, provided they have their other permits, you know, the federal permits. But when I questioned them, for example, about the Las Vegas one, I got contacted by the Vegas aquarium director, who assured me it was 100% educational. People are coming to the casino to see the aquarium. But in any event, I discussed this briefly with my colleagues from the Mid-Atlantic here and found out that they're also getting some requests. But just curious as to how much this is going on, because we've gone from maybe requests for 2 or 3 sand tigers a year to this one company's asking for 35 sand tigers this year. And from what I understand, it's pretty lucrative. Each shark, if you can get one to an aquarium and keep it alive, it's thousands of dollars. So I just wondering what the cumulative impact is, whether there are sand tigers being collected up and down the coast. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, John. You would think there were enough sharks in Las Vegas already. They wouldn't need to bring any in from anywhere else. But yeah, it brought up an interesting point, and I got to thinking back when I was, you know, still a director. I mean, we would get requests for, but given that these shark species are under HMS management at the federal level, I'm just curious as, you know, where's the coordination in terms of assuring that what individual states are doing pursuant to their own state laws are not in conflict with the overall goal of shark conservation at the federal level. So anyway, but we thought it would be good to have just a roundtable discussion about this. You know, do we see this as an issue that might need some better coordination to ensure that we don't have abuse going on? So I see Mel, your hand up.
Yeah, it's been a few years now, but we had some similar interests, I think, years ago. And the way our law is structured, it's kind of like Spud was talking about. So you've got HMS is sort of the overarching regulatory structure for sharks. South Carolina's laws are designed to align with whatever, with sharks in a specific section to align with HMS. So what we had done was, in cases where we were requested permits for collection, basically we said, well, you know, you obtain your HMS permit first, and then if HMS allows it, then, you know, we're willing to. We didn't have those kinds of numbers, but we were dealing, I think there was, I'm not sure where this group is from. I think there was a group out of France at one time, maybe, that was behind some of this. And then there were some folks in the United States. But yes, there was interest in places like, you know, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, just all kinds of interesting places. You think, oh, they have aquaria there, and they do. But it's kind of fallen off. We have a couple of occasionally there'll be folks like we have an aquarium in South Carolina, and of course sand tigers is a prime species for aquaria. But that's the way I think we dealt with it. Was we're set up to align with HMS. They get the HMS permit for so many sand tiger or whatever it is, then we're willing to allow that. But primarily, most of them are caught, for us anyway, in federal waters initially. But they were right on the edge in some cases.
I'll go to Pat Kelleher and then John Clark. Did you have your hand? You had your hand up, Pat, didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We deal with this with a policy of, we'll issue under our special license a scientific collection permit, but the policy is it can't be for resale. And that's one quick way to deal with that problem. Now, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to enforce on the side, right? If there's some side deal, but of course we're dealing with lugfish and sea urchins, not cool tiger shark, but it's a little different. But it may be a way to just create a policy around that.
Go ahead, John.
Thanks. Just to Mel's point, the situation is that these are in Delaware Bay. The sand tigers spend a lot of time. It's one of their pupping grounds is right off the mouth of the bay. And so they're easy to get right in the bay. And then to Pat's comment, I was thinking the same thing, that this is a business, but they're set up as a consultancy. So in other words, I don't know that they're charging the aquarium for their expertise, so they do the collecting. And so it's a little tricky, they're not directly selling sharks. If you go to their website, you can see, you can contact them and they will take your order or work with you, and then you'll pay them for their services rather than for the shark itself.
I guess I keep coming back to, and there's not obviously nobody here from HMS, but maybe somebody here can answer it. But is there a maximum number of certain species that can be collected in within a defined geographical area per unit of time to set by HMS? I mean, it seems like there would be something that says, okay, you could use individual states can allow the collection of these species up to these threshold numbers, and beyond that, then that's it for the year. I mean, I don't know, does anything like that exist? Go ahead, Mel.
I don't know if that's how they do it, but I know the way, and again, the way our process works, we tell people to go to them first, and then there's some discussion or an application, and they want 2 of these or 4 of these or whatever this, whatever it is. And then, I guess my assumption was that HMS is kind of doing the accounting on all of that. Like you said, I don't know if they're working in a certain allotment for educational aquarium purposes or whatever, but we just operated under if HMS tells them they can have 4 of those, then we'll match the permit basically. But that is a good question specifically for HMS, how they do that. But they may have sort of like a set aside, for that specific purpose, but I don't know that for sure.
So John, this entity that you're referring to, are they permitted by HMS to, as for the collections that they're doing at the state level?
Yeah, they are. I mean, they work up and down the coast, and so again, I think it was just more it just caught my eye this year. It's kind of like the frog in the boiling water, where the amount they were asking kept upping, and all of a sudden, it went from like 10 to 20 and now to 35, and I was just, ooh, that's a lot of sand tigers. Where are they all going? And like I said, I'm just curious to see whether this is going on with other states too. Thanks.
We actually do have Guy DeBeck from HMS is online, so I'll let him comment on this. Go ahead, Guy.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I've been listening to the conversation, and for our exempted fishing permits, and our display permits, we do get some large numbers of requests, but we always evaluate those on a case-by-case basis. Like your example there of so many sand tigers or sharks, right? That's a large number. And we wouldn't issue that number right off the top. We would evaluate that and make sure that this is not, is it appropriate, and where's those fish going, who's the collector, and a variety of situations, because we want to make it fair for everybody. Because if everyone comes to us asking for 50 sand tigers. I mean, we can't, approve all that. So it's one of those things that we kind of do on a case by case basis and trying to figure out like where those sharks are going, who's collecting those things, and then overall impacts of that. So.
All right, thanks. I guess I got a follow-up question there. So when a state, like for instance, Delaware is approached to issue permits for collection of X number of sand tigers, then, they can assume perhaps erroneously that the entity that's making that request has already vetted that through HMS and that they have all of the requisite permits from HMS to legitimize that collection at the state level. Is that a reasonable assumption or accurate?
Yeah, I mean, that has happened in the past, and I assume that will probably continue in the future. We just not always aware of whether they come to the state first or to us. And as the conversation said, that most of the states point them to us first before getting their state permit. And like I said, we do get some large number of requests of certain species, and sometimes the requests are just based on what they may collect during the year, not exactly having exact orders for those displayed species. So we usually say, hey, you have to come back and like, where do you have those orders in front of you? Some like to just put large numbers in and hope that covers them for the whole year, and they don't have to come back to us. But we kind of amend those permits throughout the year based on the orders they get.
Thanks very much. That's very helpful. Any questions for Guy from the XCOM, John Clark?
Yes, Guy, can I just get your contact information so I can tell you a little bit more about this specific situation?
Yeah, sure. My first name's Guy, Guy, at .Dubeck, DUBECK, at NOAA.gov. Or my phone number is 301-427-8540. And I'll gladly talk to you about this and have some more people who are involved with the EFP program in on the conversations. I'm just the one kind of listening in right now.
All right, thanks. Go ahead, Justin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this discussion made me go back and look at an email exchange or a series of emails that I had from last year. We had a group that was interested in doing sand tiger tagging in Long Island Sound, so not collecting the animals and bringing them back anywhere, but working with them. And we consulted with the HMS office, and the advice we were given was that because the work was going to take place entirely in state waters, that it did not require an LOA or an EFP from the HMS program, and that was the advice we were given, so we issued the state collector's permit to allow them to work with the sharks. So I guess I just wanted to put that out there, as that was my experience consulting, and that may be a consideration, if the work's going to happen in state waters.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Justin. I think that sort of speaks to where we're trying to figure out, where's the coordination take place to ensure that there isn't abuse or something happening that is certainly contrary to good conservation. Mel?
Yeah, to Justin's point, that's correct. It all depends on how your state law is structured, and we're specifically kind of directed in that direction, and it works for us. But I will say, the folks that we've worked with to do this correctly, the reporting requirements and all are pretty intense. I mean, they're required to keep daily. Actually, they come to us and tell us where they're going to be, the gear they're going to be using, and that way we've got law enforcement looped in, both federal and state law enforcement. But the folks that do it correctly that we've worked with, it's very tightly controlled in terms of the reporting and everything. So it can be done that way. But I can see where you get these large number kind of things that that's again why we feel very comfortable in deferring to the feds on that, because ultimately they've got sort of the overarching management, and that's the way our law is set up to allow for that.
All right, well, certainly brings up some concerns. Jay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to chime in a little bit, at least did happen in Rhode Island as well. We have floating fish traps, and so they get sharks on occasion, and they're in really good shape. So it was sort of attractive for exactly the thing that John is talking about. We would be in the same situation that Justin offered. You know, that's clearly state waters. It just so happened that the group that was doing this, at least when I was directly in the marine fisheries program, they had a permit anyways, and we asked them for that and used that as part of their documentation. And it was sort of happenstance. They'd kind of get them as they ended up in the fish traps. They would kind of communicate and they'd show up to get the specimen. But so that's just, you know, answering John's question about is it happening in other places. But then based on the discussion, it'd be awesome if there could be some sort of overarching, consistent policy. I think that would really be a benefit, certainly to us, and it sounds like around the table too.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking, you know, we created our Coastal Sharks Management Board to best coordinate between the states and the federal entities over shark management. So this sort of fits under that same umbrella to, you know, not to create more burdensome regulation, but just to make sure that you know, when it gets into collecting specimens, it can sometimes be the wild, wild west. As John said, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money in it, and there's a lot of temptation to circumvent due process and accountability. So maybe it's something, maybe when you and Guy talk, maybe y'all can brainstorm a few ideas of how to maybe better sync things up so that we don't have opportunities for abuse. So, but thank you, John, for bringing this up, and thanks for the discussion. So. I think, Laura, you have the numbers. Okay, well, no. All right, we'll go ahead and get our next agenda item before that, and that's discuss distribution of fishery disaster funding in the FY 2023 omnibus spending bill. Bob, more money.
Yeah, more money. Thank you, Spud. In the FY23 spending bill, there's $300 million set aside for fisheries disasters. And the legislative committee met last Monday and they had a conversation about that. And one of the representatives suggested maybe ASMSC should send a letter over to NOAA sort of asking how this $300 million is going to be allocated between different disasters. One of the concerns at our legislative committee was that all that money would go to Alaska for the crab disaster up there. The language in the omnibus bill is very, very vague. It just says this money should be used for fisheries disasters and it's available until fully utilized. So there's not a lot of guidance on whether this $300 million should go toward disasters that were already declared and haven't been funded. Is it looking forward to disasters in the future that will be declared and then funded through this $300 million. And that was the uncertainty that the legislative committee was working with, but there was concern that all this money would sort of disappear. The East Coast wouldn't get a shot at it. And, you know, so they wanted to have a conversation at the executive committee. And essentially the question for this committee is, should ASMFC send a letter to NOAA, you know, with two parts? One is, you know, requesting more information on how that money is going to be allocated, and two, should we suggest that, you know, we want to make sure some of that money, you know, is set aside to address just fishery disasters along the East Coast. So that's the quick background on this. Again, we don't have a lot of guidance from the omnibus bill, but the question is, do we want to interact with NOAA somehow on this $300 million and sort of stake our claim to some of it, or at least stake our claim to concerns that all of it may go to fishery disasters outside of our region, and you know, fisheries on the East Coast won't be helped out. So that's the quick background, Mr. Chair.
Who has a approved but unfunded or a pending fishery disaster out of this group? Raise your hand. So Florida, Maryland, maybe. Shrimp? How about Mel? Has all the shrimp disasters been funded?
Yeah, we're actually in good shape right now. But I know Florida for sure, that was one of the things we were thinking about.
Okay. Nobody else pending, nothing pending that would be, okay. All right, so obviously Florida. So anybody online?
Yeah, Bob, would that be Herring? Because Herring's still in OMB, isn't it?
Let me. Sure, it's, well, actually, there is an update on that, right, Laura? We think that one may have gotten out of OMB yesterday, but we don't fully declare that yet. So that one's close, but the funding is already set aside for the Herring disaster. It's funded, it just, the spend plan needs to be approved. So it's
Okay.
11.3 or 11.7 million, I forget the exact number.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Mike Ruccio, I saw your hand back. You want to come up and comment?
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to speak and provide some direct federal engagement. So hopefully I can add a little bit of clarity to this. So the description was fairly nebulous in there. Generally, you know, as you've just seen around the table, we have a number of positively determined disaster requests already, as well as a number of pending requests that are kind of in various stages of development and determination. So we make allocation recommendations as soon as a disaster has been positively found by the Secretary of Commerce. So this money will go out kind of in order. Some of it will go to some of those already positively determined disasters, some of which you've mentioned are in Alaska. Some of that has already been adjudicated as well. I think the determination for the Alaska fisheries has already been made. So the remainder of that 300 million that exists will be going out as we make future determinations. So it is designed to kind of bolster the program as we make future determinations. I know the Florida disaster is pending and would expect that these funds are something that can be used for that if it's positively found. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but if there's need for further engagement, we would welcome any correspondence from the commission, obviously, to speak further about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. All right, online, we've got Doug Hammons, and then I'll go to David Borden. Doug, you there? All right, his hand's down. I'll go to him. Okay,
I'm
go
here,
ahead.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, apologies, I had to switch microphones. Yeah, I sent you a text, just you asked the question about pending. So 28 Georgia Strip 2018 disaster, we just had our spend plan approved, so we're working forward with that one, but it's still out there.
All right, thanks, Doug. I'll go to David Borden and then back to Erica and then Pat Kelleher.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say, prior to passage of the main whale legislation, I was inclined to advocate for some type of disaster funding for mitigation in particular. Because if we get to the stage where we have to go to negligible impact on whales, it will be a disaster for the fixed gear fisheries up and down the coast. So I'd urge the group to submit a letter and at least keep an oar in the water on this. None of us can predict where this whale issue is going to end up. There's a 6-year period, but who knows what the next Congress is going to do. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. All right, Erica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't belabor the woes of the fishery disaster determination process. We're all very familiar with it. Our past chairman, current Commissioner Spotswood, testified before Congress about the challenges it represents in real life for the fishermen who are affected by these disasters. One thing, though, that is very difficult for us is the difference in the way that administrations handle the disaster declaration process and whether each disaster is treated in a similar manner. So the Alaska disaster declaration came fairly quickly. We had Hurricane Ian who came through Florida, wiped out a huge portion of our shrimp fleet on the Gulf Coast, took out processing centers, marinas, and more, and then it went all the way across to the East Coast and hampered the ability to fish and produce seafood on that coast as well. So we're hit terribly with that storm. And we have been advised by NOAA that we need to provide data a year after the disaster had occurred before we might become eligible. So we're hoping that some of these funds that have already been appropriated or approved can come to Florida for those affected by Hurricane Ian.
Thanks, Erica. Pat Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure there's really a need to send a letter on this particular issue. We have, Secretary has authorized or approved disasters that probably are going to far exceed the 300 million, especially when you bring the crab issue into play, the Florida issue that's still at play. I think there's broader issues here. And I don't know if, Mike, if you can tell us the last time there was an appropriation on this. It wasn't that many years ago, but that was not enough money, I don't believe either. So I think the issue at hand really is not about preserving money for the East Coast, because that money is probably already going to be spent. I think the broader issue is making sure that we're actively engaged in future appropriations, knowing that we've got some other big challenges ahead. And just quickly on David Borden's point, I think the Lobster Board needs to have a conversation around the issue of buyouts associated with that. I mean, the language around disasters, around ESA, we'd be charting a new course here. So I think we really do need to have that conversation at the Lobster Board from an effort control issue as well. So I think there's time to have that conversation.
All right, thanks, Pat. Mike, go ahead.
Just quickly, if I could, thank you for the second bite at the apple here. Certainly understood, we have been highly cognizant of the challenges that disaster applications present. It's something that we've worked really hard internally to try to improve on. There are some parts of the process, as I think you're probably painfully aware, that are not us, that present challenges from time to time. But also, if you look in the legislation, there are a number of new requirements, including some specific timing requirements, tried to have a little more clarity, I think, come forward in terms of what's expected when someone is requesting disaster assistance that's designed to help front load and expedite the process and the decision making for the Secretary. We're still working through the legislation to kind of see what kind of guidance can we put out, how does it change our requirements, internal processes. So that work's ongoing, but we do expect in short order we'll be putting out revised information so that states and other parties that have need of application will understand the process a little bit better, and hopefully that all lends itself to more expedient determinations. But it is, as you're aware, a challenge, and it has varied from administration to administration. So that's all fair criticisms that we take on the chin.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I guess the term expedient means different things to different people. And, just my little home state, we're still waiting on funding for a 2018 shrimp disaster. So, it's a challenge. It needs to be done right with the correct oversight and accountability. But I know everybody would appreciate any efforts to streamline it, preserve the accountability, but make expedient perhaps a little more expedient. So, we've had a good discussion. Mel?
Yeah, I was just going to say, being involved with the legislative committee, some of the thinking there was that, and having been through this process, part of the problem is that even if you have a fairly expedient declaration and you've got the disaster established, it's the lineup with the money that has to come from Congress. And, in Georgia, remember that in 2013, we had a disaster, and then the money eventually showed up with 19 or 18 years later. And sometimes it's available and sometimes it's not. And I think we were looking at this and there's 300 million there, thinking, wow, that's a lot of money that just happens to be there. And if you could line up a current disaster with that made sense. But as Pat said, it may be that there's already enough disasters in the queue that the 300 million's, potentially already gone. But I think that was part of the thinking, is that, and if you hadn't been through this, that you don't realize you have to line up the expedient declaration and the money, and sometimes there's a gap. And when there's a gap, then the folks that have really suffered from this, don't get any help for years. And we had our shrimp freeze disaster in 2018, as Georgia did. So we actually had the money show up relatively quickly, 1920 or whatever it was. That was fairly quick. But so now we're moving forward, and we're about to, hopefully this year, we'll start acting on that. But you've got folks that have, in that time frame, have passed away, left the fishery, gone out of business. And that's all we were trying to do, I think, is to, try to line up the disaster and the hurt with the help a little quicker. But I know that's the way the system works. And as you said, we could maybe improve expediency of the establishment of the disaster. That's great. But the money has to be there in a fairly timely manner. And, we don't control the pocketbook, so to speak. But that's why this just seemed like an opportunity with $300 million appropriated for that disasters that, wow, that might line up with some current needs like Florida's, or some things other than perhaps the West Coast or Alaska. But that's, I think, what we were thinking, is just to point that out. But I think everybody understands. No, it certainly understands what's going on. But that was what I think we were thinking, is this was an opportunity to have money and a fresh disaster line up fairly quickly to provide expedient relief for people that are hurting right now.
Thanks, Mel. It sounds like, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, that what's in the queue will certainly be funded by this money. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so, to the extent that a positive determination is made. If you look, I believe online, we've got an accounting of everything that comes in, and we get a lot of disaster requests, and not all of them are found positively by the secretary. Some of them do languish over time for various reasons. Additional information is needed to kind of make that decision. But I think your statement is fair and correct, that to the extent that there is positive determination and there's money available, we kind of take those in order of execution. So.
Man, and Doug just pointed out something, that there's the getting the disaster declaration approved, there's the getting the money, and then there's also having your spend plan approved, which can be another lengthy process along the way. So there's multiple steps. So, Erica?
So I heard it suggested that a letter might not be necessary at this time, but I'd like the executive committee to please consider a letter that would state the need for disaster assistance on the East Coast and requesting consideration. It doesn't have to be so far afield that you feel like it's flying in the face of the process, but we'd really appreciate just something to come out. We're facing fishermen who have not only lost their business, but do not have a home. And so, excuse me, I'm getting emotional.
Thank you, Erica. So, all right, well, I think there's divergent opinions here, but I think, is there a downside to communicating the need and the urgency, on behalf of the East Coast states? Pat, can you live with that?
Yeah, I certainly could. And I think to Erica's earlier point, the process issue has certainly been a big part of the conversation. And I think it would be very worthwhile for this body to weigh in on the process and request that there's some engagement on improving that process.
All right. Well, I'll look to Bob and the staff to draft this up, something to address the points we've discussed, and then we'll get it out to everybody to look at. So thanks for that discussion. I want to just hit this other business item real quick. Bob, talk a little bit about this Northeast biological sampling issue and perhaps states being able to help out.
Yeah, thank you. We've talked about it a little bit at different venues, state directors meeting and others, but the Northeast region conducts a biological sampling program. It's run out of Garfo, but the data all goes to the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. And that program has been level funded for 5 years or more. And as everyone knows here, expenses are going up, and level funding means services go down to some degree. And the biological sampling that's being, or the biological samples that are being collected are down by 50% or more in the Northeast region right now. So that's biological samples from Maine through North Carolina. They're collected by a contractor that's under contract from Garfo, the Northeast Regional Office. And since samples are down 50%, these are what, lengths and ages that go into stock assessments for a number of species that we manage, as well as the councils and some of the jointly managed species. And obviously, when you cut your biological sampling in half, the robustness of your stock assessment goes down, the uncertainty goes up. That means quotas go down, is kind of the result a lot of times. So the question is, we don't think we can find any additional money in the short term. So given that the states have some biological sampling and collection capabilities, and I know Massachusetts has contacted the Northeast Science Center and or Garfo directly, but the question is, can the states that have folks out in the field that are at marinas or at commercial landing sites, can they help out and collect some biological samples for the Northeast region? Right now, as I said, they collect lengths through automated measuring boards that are Bluetooth connected, and the lengths are sent off, and they collect otoliths, and those otoliths are packaged up and sent to the Northeast Fisheries Science Center once a month for processing and aging. So we don't have to decide it today, obviously, and we don't have to go talk through each state's capacity to help out, but I think what would be good is if the states from Maine through North Carolina have capacity and or want to engage in a conversation about how to collect these samples, reach out to me and or Tony, and we can, put together a call with John Hare as the Science Center Director, Mike Pentney, Tony and I, and Pat Canfield were on a call with Mike Pentney and John Hare on Monday. And I think we can pull together the state representatives that are in your biological sampling program. I don't know if it's state directors or if it's someone in more in your biology section or stock assessment sections, but just to have a conversation about what the capacity is. NOAA has sort of quarterly bins of regional samples that they want to collect. So there's like a Rhode Island, Connecticut region, and they've got the list of species that they want and the number of samples that they're trying to obtain, and we can feed that information to the states if the states have capacity to go out and help out with that. This program collects a few 100,000 ages and lengths, so it's not, I'm not sure we can fill that whole gap, but maybe we can close it a little bit and not be down 50%. Maybe we'll be down 60, 70, or down 30, 40%, which would be a lot better than where we are right now. And the other part of this is, long term, we do need to find some more money for this sampling program through Garfo and the Science Center, and just try to bolster that a little bit so they can fund their contractor and get back to where they were a few years ago. So that's the background on it. Again, we don't have to solve the problem today, but if your states have capacity and you want to engage in a conversation, let me know and we can start that conversation with the federal folks.
All right, thanks. I'll go ahead, Pat, and then Jake.
So the money piece of this, I think, if we could, at that meeting, if there's going to be a meeting, which Maine would be happy to participate in, let's identify what that shortfall is, right? I mean, and what we need to do to fix that, because maybe we could just add that to our federal appropriations priority list for the Hill visits.
All right, Jay, and then I'll go to Dan and then Eric.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so very interested in meeting Bob, and I think it's important because it's not just a matter of collecting. There have been circumstances in the past that we've experienced where we are actually out collecting data, but or samples or whatever, and they won't be used because of how they were collected. So I like this method is important as well as can you do it.
All right, Thanks, Jay. Dan and Eric.
Just a quick explanation. We reached out to John Hare at the Science Center because we've reprogrammed our IJ money from a project that was principally working on conservation engineering to the more, I guess, bread and butter issues that we think are required. So we've hired 2 entry-level biologists to do like sea sampling, but also this port sampling. So that's the backstory.
Very good. All right, Eric, and then you, Sheree.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Kelleher's question, I guess, we've had this conversation at NRCC twice, maybe? And we've had it, 3 times. And we've also had it at the New England Council, and I'm pretty sure the MID has addressed it as well. It is critically important to resurrect this program to where it needs to be. That's the first point. But we did ask at the NRCC, the Science Center, how much money are we talking about? And I think it started out at about 200 grand, but there was a lot of uncertainty in their response. But I think we got pretty quickly when we figured it out over time, it's probably 900,000 or $1 million. That's the number you're talking about. But it was an interesting conversation because it's like, how much do you need? We'll have to get back to you, which is totally unacceptable to me, you know. But we did start at a fairly reasonable number. But I think you're talking about 900 grand or $1 million to get it where it needs to be. And you know, Bob's right that the results of the stock assessments without that data is devastating to the industry. So, thank you.
All right, thanks, Eric. Sheree?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. I think that we do need to have conversations about this, and I like Pat's tremor to, let's figure out what the issue really is and how we can all contribute, but we need to know, the costs and what the expectations are. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Okay. Laura has done some mathematics here, and I believe it is displayed up on the spreadsheet and under the new column. So you want to talk us through that just briefly?
So I did as Justin suggested, and I did a 50% equal, and then took out the 50,000 for Mass and the 386 for New Hampshire, and then did a 50% equal, and then the remaining 50% by formula. And it's the purpley pink column would be the current splits allocations.
All right, what's kind of a little short, but what's your reaction to that, XCOM? All right, Jay.
I think I like Justin's method and just kind of looking at the outcome here. For Rhode Island, it's pretty good. So we'd be happy with this approach.
All right. Well, I'll make this easy. Does anybody have heartburn over this and just can't live with it and will leave the meeting mad, stomping out of here? No, John, no, okay.
I'm not going to be mad. I mean, the conversation earlier, there's an unmet need. There's not enough money. This is fairly equitable. So thank you.
Thanks, John. All right. If there's not any opposition, then we will consider this the approach we'll use, recognizing again that these numbers will probably be tweaked a little bit more based on the number of unspent funds. Right.
And recognizing that we need to get it approved by NOAA.
Right. Important point there. All right. All right, Jay.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I know you're trying to get to the end here. So, just that last comment. So I was assuming this, the way this would play out would be we would individually kind of do spend plans. Okay. I didn't know if there was some big omnibus spend plan going in, but okay.
And I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, but you'd use these numbers knowing that they might be tweaked a little bit, but not anything, I would imagine, significantly so.
Correct, and I won't we won't need spend plans before we ask for the year extension on this. We would just give them the theoretical reason and background.
All right, very good. One last thing, just want to call everybody's attention to, there was a letter in the briefing materials from the Southeastern Massachusetts Pine Barrens Alliance. I just encourage you to read that. If you have questions, obviously you can reach out to the author of the letter on this, but our time is up. Appreciate everybody's attention. Good discussion this morning, and if there's no other business, Ray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if it could be brought up at the executive committee meeting or the policy meeting, but for years we had representation at the HMS AP hearings. And since Kirby has moved on in his career, I'm not sure we have representation any longer.
We do have representation. Dustin was on the HMS AP and he attended the meeting in the fall, and Caitlin is taking over for Coastal Sharks.
Thank you much, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. All right. No other business coming for the ESCOM. We'll be adjourned, and you want to start at 40.